All right. 6:01, and we will begin with this evening's town council. These items are for discussion. So, of during the work session, unless added in client. Oh, and to pick things up, we'll on by.
So, back in March, there was some articles on WWI and NPR related to community power and electric grids. And at the March elections, both the town manager and I received some comments and questions from residents of Newmarket related to community power. So we thought it would be good to ask the senior member of community power to come address the town council, explain electric rates, what the future might look like, and also talk about what the benefits of power. So with that, I will turn it over to the executive director of community power, Ken Gearton. You can get much more smooth than that.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you. It's been a couple of years since I've had the pleasure of meeting with this body, and glad to be here to provide an update and then to get into a Q&A and just have a discussion about the state of community power and the energy landscape in New Hampshire. I am Henry Herndon. I'm the executive director, and I've been involved in the development of this market since its beginning. And so just a little bit of intro before I get into some of the slides. Just to provide some more context, so Newmarket was one of the initial founding and launching communities almost 3 years ago to date of community power in the state with coalition in April of 2023. So it's been almost 3 years, and since that time, over 70 towns across the state have adopted community power. Community power serves more than 30% of the electric customers in the state. So we are in the midst of this market transformation that really got kicked off with Newmarket being one of the leaders a few years back. And so it's a good time to sort of revisit it and discuss the context and where we're at with things. And yeah, this exciting shift towards more local control and options in local energy projects and programs and some of the benefits that we can get into. So our agenda, I understand, I'll provide an update on Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, Newmarket Community Power as well. I'll discuss the financial outlook of Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, our rates in the competitive energy landscape, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits. And just sort of, I don't know, is this broadcast or are there folks that are watching from home?
Yep.
Very good. So just more context in case anybody's watching. Our organization, the Coalition, is a nonprofit joint powers agency. We are formed and created by municipal members, cities, towns, and counties across the state, including the town of Newmarket. We have 68 members, and we're created to serve them. We're a nonprofit corporation governed by the members and created for to represent their interests, both in power procurement and at the state in terms of legislative and regulatory policy on energy, and to support them towards their energy goals. So I'll get into the slides. I'll do some of the update, and then very much looking forward to discussion as well. I think that will be constructive. I'll also maybe just apologize up front. We have a great team on the member services staff that typically fields governing body, town council, select board presentations. I used to do a lot of these a few years back, but if I'm a little rusty or perhaps less polished than some of the folks that do it every day, you'll forgive me in advance, I hope. And again, please be here. So I'm just going to start on the next slide, talking a little bit some of the customer communications improvements and updates that we have made recently, just in the past several months or past year. And I guess I have the clicker. Very good. So this is just a slide referencing the Newmarket Community Power website. Again, this is an optional program. It's the new default electricity program. And again, just some stats up front. Newmarket Community Power currently serves 4,220 electric accounts within the town. Any of those electric accounts in any given month can choose to shop with a different electricity supplier to go back to their utility like Eversource. So this is a new default option, but it is adding choices and competition to the market landscape. And the 4,220 accounts is of a total of 5,677 accounts. I understand maybe Mr. Robinson that briefs the council on the stats and participation rates. And there was recently a refresh enrollment of customers in Newmarket. Any customer can go to this website. They can select a different energy option. They can learn about the program. They can choose options with Community Power or to go back to their utility or another provider. And just want folks at home to be aware of this, communitypowernh.gov, and you can pretty easily find the Newmarket page there and self-serve. So this next slide is just showing that for customers. You know, we encourage folks to be informed and educated about their energy options, to sign up for communications, rate notices, you know, what's going on in the legislative space and energy, if folks are interested in that. There's all kinds of good events, and we have a growing subscriber base. And we see a lot of growing activity of customers coming in and out of programs, showing, you know, the elevated education about energy markets. So all you need is your electric bill and your account number on that bill to then self-serve and join the program or leave the program or choose a clean energy option. I'll shift to talk about the current rates. This is just a chart illustrating the current Newmarket Community Power base rate. It's about 14.5 cents, and you know, our rates transparently reflect our cost of service, and you can see the different components. Primarily, you know, energy and wholesale market costs. This is the energy ancillaries capacity, and the RPS stands for Renewable Portfolio Standard. That's the renewable content as a minimum required by state law. And then you can see the operating expense of the coalition, and on top the reserve contributions. So presently about 82% of the rate covers the cost of energy and renewable content. There's 14% for building of community reserves at present, and then a small 4% for the operating expense. Now I will focus us on that reserve component for a moment. So the way the coalition operates is, like any supplier out there will have this similar cost makeup, but the reserve component would be a profit margin of, say, a private supplier. In the coalition's case, this is what builds the Community Reserve Fund, which is our sort of risk management tool to, over time, create stability, shift out, manage price volatility and price spikes for customers, and empower the coalition collectively to achieve some of the goals of members. Contract with counterparties to build solar projects, or otherwise secure, beneficial financing and credit or energy project development. Presently, we are in a period of building of reserves, and that portion of the rate associated with reserve is more substantial during the present rate period than it will likely be over time. What we can expect as we move through time is a tapering of the amount of reserve adder as we get into some of the strategy and our financial outlook, move towards building those reserves, having to contribute less, and becoming more competitive in the market. And again, we'll welcome questions. I'm happy to maybe get through it all and then go back into the slides, but whatever would be most appropriate. This is just a reflection of the activity of customers specific to Newmarket Community Power. These are opt-out rates over time, and you can sort of see the trend, and this is typical of what we observe, is that spike happening around, is it in December perhaps?
The initial one?
Yeah, that initial one, that bump to 16, that's like right at the end of December, early January. That is the announcement of rate changes, and we see more customer activity because more and more folks are aware and are subscribed. And then the second bump in activity is rates going into effect. So that's a typical trend that we see, and again, representative of the broader growing education in the market. So, this data, there's lots of data, and we're happy to also work with the council to provide any kind of data that would be valuable or interesting.
Are these numbers of customers or accounts?
These are customers that are opting out of service. And we could show during different rate periods, we see influx of customers. Rates are significantly cheaper than utilities. Right now, there's a slight premium, so we're seeing some customers go back, shop. Financial outlook. So all of our, we're We are an extension of municipal government, and we are subject to the same right to know provisions, and our meetings are public, and our books and records are public. So if there's any specific information, we frequently distribute materials and make them available to members or towns, our treasurer's reports, for example. So there's a lot of detail. It's all posted online. This is just from the most recent treasurer's report, our current financial forecasts of our current position and forecast. So I'll just show, again, some of the context here. This was a record winter in New Hampshire in terms of costs. Some of us may have seen Governor Kelly Ayotte on the news talking about ISO New England had a close to $1 billion cost overrun. There's this new component in the ISO market called the DAISY charge, Day Ahead Ancillary Services Initiative, that it spiked considerably relative to what the ISO forecast. This is something that affects all suppliers in the market. There's been some news coverage, and it's in some of the market update materials that I shared. But part of the impact of that is you can see there's a draw in the January period. I don't know, the pointer might not show up, but in our current position of negative reserve during this rate period, forecast to have net positive accrual position where it says UAP 7. That is summer of this year. And then you can see sort of a tapering of that blue line in the middle for reserve growth moving through the remainder of the year towards January of 27, at which point we will have positive reserve accumulation, and we're really tracking towards that purple bar and dashed line, which is our minimum target for our policy. That represents 60 days of cash in reserve as of the end of January 2028.
January 2028, 2029.
I'm sorry, December 2028. Yeah. The end of 2028.
Can you just briefly describe what UAP is?
UAP stands for Utility Auction Period. It's our internal jargon for what rate period you're in. We should probably, that's a helpful question. So each rate period moves from each of these lines in a 6-month rate period.
This chart means, I have no idea what this chart is. Could you tell me what you're trying to show me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So this represents the reserve accrual of the coalition. You could think of that as our equity position or profitability. And
Is this
so
your reserve? Is that what that is?
that is the reserve.
So you're trying to build a reserve.
We are in the process of a period of building reserve towards.
Okay, so what you're showing me is that you have a negative reserve right now, and you're trying to go back to a positive reserve.
That's correct.
And positive is above the black line?
That's correct. And there are multiple lines. We forecast probabilities as the energy market is subject to wide variations. And we are refining those probabilities, but essentially we have a best case in green, a worst case in yellow, and a middle of the road case out of our 100 probabilistic scenario runs when we forecast load and price through our modeling. And there is a narrow band of variability during the current period. And this is because we have fixed our costs. We are not exposed to spot market variability during this period. Going into the next rate period, we will similarly purchase forward contracts, fix our costs, and then significantly narrow the range of variability. During a period of reserve growth, we have low risk tolerance, and so we like certainty and fixed costs and more certain outcomes. If perhaps there's some foregone upside value to that. If you have a wider range of probabilities, you might get lower prices and you might supercharge the reserve, but you might have a very expensive winter and you might draw. If that makes sense.
Can I just kind of summarize something? Correct me if I'm wrong if I say anything wrong, but in 2025, Community Power ran into some financial difficulties. And we ended up dipping well into our reserves and ended up almost in a negative position. And what we're doing now is trying to recover those reserves and get us back into a profitability.
That's well said. Yep.
And how are these negative reserves funded?
Through financing.
So you borrowed money against this.
That's correct, right?
We have contracts with
Yeah,
companies
third
that
parties, yeah,
allow us to draw on their credit.
that's right. Other questions about this is an accrual forecast of reserves or equity. And we'll continue discussing this in some of the other slides.
Council, just a reminder, if you raise your hand to be recognized, just so that we can make sure everyone's got an opportunity to ask questions.
Just a quick observation, this was done before the current global economic, whatever word you want to fill in after that.
Right.
Are they working on coming up with a new outlook now, or are you waiting for, are these set like intervals? Are you going to do another one of these at a set period of time at the next rate setting?
We run this sort of continuously internally on a weekly basis, and then we produce monthly reports, snapshots for the finance committee and the board. So there is a new report every month that is publicly published.
Okay.
And yes, we are observing energy market impacts of geopolitical events, and we have observed a bump up in winter forward pricing this December, January expenses in the past couple of months. And so what that means, though, is what this is based on is underlying assumption that our rates fully cover our costs, whatever those costs are. And then the assumption is that on this slide, we see a 2-cent adder in the rate in green. And what this shows is the 2-cent adder, that green block, getting cut in half to a 1-cent adder as of July, as in a 1-cent rate relief of whatever the cost of power. But the cost of power for us and for other entities in this market is affected by geopolitical events for us and for the other entities.
Yeah. Thank you.
So anyway, maybe to zoom out just a touch further, we're going into an annual meeting where all the members will convene on April 30th. We'll have board election and committee appointments, and it's a good, get together with the membership more broadly as opposed to just the 20 board members. And we'll have lots of good discussions there, and then we're moving towards a rate setting in June where ourselves and utilities and others will set rates. There's a balance to be had to improve competitive positioning, rate competitiveness, while maintaining the growth in reserves. And again, affordability and customer rates, we care about, doing our best for the customers, certainly. So that's some of the context of this. Okay, so other questions on this before I jump ahead? And again, happy to come back to this. Okay, the competitive energy landscape. So before I dive into all this kind of headlines here, again, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, in 2023, the state embarked on a market transformation in the energy space. We have since seen 30% of customers move into these locally controlled, sort of competitive energy community power programs. Now we're up to 70 plus towns that are something. In the midst of that market transformation, the state regulator, the Public Utility Commission, did a funny thing. They told the utilities to change how they purchase electricity. Utilities used to do fixed price contracts. Every 6 months, lock in a rate, you pay what you get. You know exactly what it is. In the midst of the past couple of years, the Public Utility Commission said, no more fixed price contracts for much of your portfolio, be in the spot market, and set what's called a proxy rate. Proxy rate is essentially an estimation of what 6 months of power will cost, and you set a proxy for that. And at the end of 6 months, you see, well, what was the actual? Did the spot market cost more, or did it cost less? And what we have found is that those proxy rates have materially underpriced the market relative to actuals. So we have these financial losses that have built up with Eversource and Liberty and the other utilities, and the folks in Concord at the legislature and the Public Utility Commission are trying to figure out what to do with that. So they're starting to generate some attention here, but I wrote a piece and I've shared it with you. And the Consumer Advocate wrote this piece down below, which I would encourage folks to look up, maybe take a look at his Substack blog. But This is exacerbated by, on the right, there's the reference to the governor and other coverage of this $921 million cost of DAISY, which is 6 times more than what was estimated. It was estimated at, between 100 and 200 million. It came in at 900 million. This was part of the winter impacts, why we're at the negative position we're at now. But this has affected everybody in the market, the utilities and other suppliers. And so the rates that we've seen for utilities for this period and last period, most likely, or last period and most likely this period, haven't covered their costs. And so there's this question: how do we make up the losses? There's a bill, House Bill 1733, that would address this. And again, it's a complicated issue, but I'll do my best to convey it. On the one, there's this question of utilities used to just do fixed price contracts, stable backstop, you know what you get, there's no risk. So the bill, as originally passed to the Senate, said no more spot market, which was the source of these under collections. Because they went on the spot market, they could have won, they could have lost, but they lost. And so that's one question. Should they be in the spot market, or should they have a fixed price, sort of stable benchmark for the rest of the market to compare against? Should the monopoly utility be competing with community power and third parties in the supply business, or should they just be the backstop? That's the question. So that's one piece: spot market or fixed cost. The other piece is how do they collect for losses? There's 2 options. So the fair option would be utility. Eversource has a supply rate. If they undercollected in that supply rate, they should put it back in the supply rate, and the folks who are on Eversource supply would pay for that. The other option under consideration is shifted into a stranded cost charge or a distribution charge, a poles and wires charge, that if you're on community power, if you're on Eversource supply, everybody pays it, so they would socialize that loss. So this is the policy discussion that is actively playing out with 1733 right now. So I don't know if that's clear, or if there's questions, but.
Councilor.
It is clear, or at least I think it is. Maybe I'm just imagining it, but basically you're saying either, well, there's a question of whether Eversource or Unitil or whatever should be competing with third-party suppliers in the first place, and then there's a question of whether a potential loss, how it gets recouped, is essentially whether it's socialized, everybody pays, or only your own customers. Okay. I know what my answer would be. There are some customers in the market who don't have a choice as far as who they can choose. People who are net metered. So they have to choose Eversource. So they would be forced to pay, having no choice to be elsewhere. Is that I know it's veering off topic, but I have to throw it in while I still remember. And if you can address that later on, that would be fine too. But is that the kind of the forcing the net metered customers into Eversource contracts? Is that something that is on the table anytime in the future? I asked Councilor Martina that every time he reports, so
Yes.
I'm taking this opportunity to.
We care about this issue. We are frustrated that it has been slow progress, no progress to date on this. 2 sort of comments. On the one hand, like if there is this apparent premium to community power rates, and there is a premium, but there's this question of to what extent, if the utility rate didn't cover its costs, then there's sort of an artificial comparison there. But if the utility rate is lower than its cost, that actually hurts net metered customers because they get paid the utility supply rate. So the lower that supply rate is, and if the supply rate is actually getting pushed into a stranded cost charge, that's less compensation net metering customers. So that's one piece. And then the other piece, I wish I had better news on allowing Newmarket Community Power to serve the net metered customers and source power from them. We have some progress with Unitil, not yet with Eversource. Unitil is a little more further along with smart meters and data, and wanting to share data with third parties and maybe enable a local market for net metered customers to kind of supply their community power program. In the next year or 2, we might be able to pilot something in some Unitil communities, and I think that's sort of that's our strategy there to move that forward. Very good. So I guess this is similar, but I did hand out. I don't want to have information overload, but on our website we published this market update, and I handed out printed copies of this. We talked about the Day Ahead Ancillary Services Initiative, the DAISY charge, and what's that about? How has that impacted the competitive landscape, our rates, other suppliers' rates? Purchase of receivables, sort of in the weeds. And then I just mentioned the units in progress on data, rates of distributed energy. If you are really interested in this Senate hearing with the link and the materials was, I think, very enlightening, where you had legislators, like intelligent legislators on energy issues, Community Power Coalition, private suppliers and brokers, the utilities, Department of Energy, all sort of come together and talk about this utility proxy rates and should they be competing? What do we do about the losses? I thought it was a fascinating hearing. So just for your reference, if you're interested in checking that out. And then in terms of like the coalition strategy moving forward, our strategy to increase competitiveness is one, build the reserves that will allow for future rate relief over time, so we have to contribute less to the reserves. And also by having reserves, we will lower our financing costs, our interest costs. We talked a little bit about that. We're also investing in portfolio management, so we have good partners and vendors, but we are moving into the remainder of this year and into 2027. We will be bringing in-house on staff more of the portfolio management, the power purchasing. And so we're excited that we're going to be hiring a director of power operations and potentially doing some other restructuring. To expand internal staff capacity over time, we may be able to more directly participate in the ISO market, which opens up more flexibility, benefits. Build towards a credit rating. We do have access to things like low-cost municipal government debt, bond financing, things of this nature that can add to our competitiveness. And then ultimately develop, this is more long-term, but over the 3 to 5 to 10-year time frame, development of more energy projects will be a competitive advantage. If we have local batteries or solar plus storage or power generation, then that can enhance our ability to give customers value. We'll have local assets that has locally long benefit, but then it can essentially help match our customer load and demand with our supply purchasing and with incentives.
Thank you. Can you put some approximate timelines on those initiative strategies?
Yeah. So right now we're in a sort of steeper reserve growth period through the end of July, and then we may. This is decided; it's a board decision, but there may be some tapering of that reserve growth as soon as this year, if not 2027. And the reserve minimum target is end of 2028. So I would say a tapering starting this year or early next year, and then further tapering after we meet that reserve target. Lower interest and expense. We're right now forecasting retiring our financing obligations in quarter 2, 2027. Portfolio management, I think in the next quarter, I think we could probably announce 3 or 4, we can announce a new director of power operations. And then within the 12-month time frame, there are plans for, that's a priority, our power operations department, and building out internal capacity. Market participant, that's a 3-year outlook. Credit rating, that's like a 3 to 5 year outlook. And project development, we have developed a project, so the largest solar array in the state, Warner, Harvey Plains, been constructed, that's a Community Power Coalition project. And that's going to go live in a month or 2, and then I think more of those to come in the coming years.
Is that follow up? Okay, thank you. Is that so? I have a question about the Warner project, but are these stepping stones that build on each other? Yes. Okay. And the Warner project, is that owned by the town of Warner or Community Power in Warner, or is that a coalition portion project?
It's owned by a third-party developer or a financier, and we have a power purchase agreement where we essentially purchase the power from that. And then they have probably a payment in lieu of taxes, like with the town, so the town also has a local benefit payment structure there.
How big is that?
5 megawatts. And here, 5 megawatts. And if you're ever driving up 89 to Hanover, Lebanon, just look out your window on the right when you're in Warner and you see big, beautiful projects. Yeah. I'm sorry we don't have a photo. That we'll put it in the next one. Other questions about any of this? I talked about some of these benefits, but so I don't know that I need to spend too much time here. But again, like our reserves are controlled and owned by the members. So when you see those reserves building, they ultimately are the city and town's monies. You can't withdraw them unless you were to add a discretionary rate option. You could choose to mark up your rate and collect monies, but I understand the market has not done that. Again, we're governed by our members. Mr. Levinson has been on our board, serves on a couple of our committees, so the members are really driving our direction in our development projects. We talked about, the expanded competition in the market, expanded choices, some of the adaptations, you could call them, that we're seeing in the market from utilities. And then, market innovation and public advocacy. So we have a great director of regulatory legislative affairs. We have a team that is representing the interests of communities at the Public Utility Commission, at the legislature. You'll subscribe to our legislative alerts if you're into that sort of thing. I think it's valuable to have the municipal community voice as a counterweight to some of the investor-owned utilities in Concord. And we talked about that from the projects. We also purchase renewable energy certificates from customers all over the state, large and small. So if you have solar and you sell your RECs with another third party and you're interested in options, I think we have good pricing to buy local RECs from citizens all over the state. So that concludes the presentation, and again, I'm pleased to have more discussion.
Not to toot our own horn here. One of the benefits of community power is on the legislative side that we advocate for consumers. Could you just talk a little bit about the Eversource wanted to charge all customers with their large customer under collections? Just mention that.
Yeah, so the issue kind of keeps coming up, but there was a significant success of the Public Utility Commission last fall, I believe, where the proposal at the Public Utility Commission was Eversource had some losses and we want to put an stranded cost charge, and it was like $7 million, something like that, that was prevented from, being socialized and charged to our customers.
The losses were for their large customers, Walmart, Lowe's, those sort of things. They wanted to pass that on to everybody, all residential. Right? Community power was instrumental in getting that reversed.
That's correct. Yeah.
Questions, comments?
Councilor Blackson.
So we've been following community power for a long time. I remember the vice mayor of Claremont used to give all the presentations. I remember you were a student at UNH working for free for community power for a while.
Something like that.
Well, that's what you told me. But so you have a board which consists of a number of people with some impressive resumes in this industry, right? And when a company like yours gets in trouble, like you did, it's typical that they would go out and try to find somebody with a lot of experience in the field who would be willing to put their name, up as president of the company, basically saying, me, I'm a professional in this field, and I'm willing to say this company is worth investing in, right? Which is what you're asking us to do. Did you try to find somebody like that? And did it fail, or did you not try?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So, and I'm not sure exactly what time frame we're looking at, but in 2023, we concluded a national search for a veteran of the industry to hire as our CEO. That individual is our CEO for about close to 2 years, a little less than 2 years. And then we had a leadership transition, interim leadership starting in March of last year through very recently. And during that time period, the board did conduct an extensive search and considered candidates for the executive director position, and ultimately, honored the bid selected.
So, can I ask you a second question? So, are you familiar with what the town of Newmarket pays for electricity?
In terms of a rate or a dollar figure, or
The rate, yeah. Just the generation rate.
the supply rate is about 14.5 cents for community power.
No, what the town of Newmarket pays.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
I don't even know that off my head.
We pay 9.89
Oh, I
cents.
see. I see the third party, understood, right.
Yeah, which we have brokered, the same that you did. We went out and contracted it, right? And then we have a delivery charge on top of that, right? So, our job here is to make sure that the people of Newmarket, get the best deal they possibly can. Right? And so we as a town are paying, roughly 10 cents a kilowatt hour, right? And then we're asking the town people to pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And it's not obvious to me, why we should ask the town people to pay this premium on top of what the town's willing to pay.
Yeah, I think that's well received. Those are fair remarks. Yep. Again, there are nuances in the market, but no, I hear what you're saying.
Counselor, Whitworth, and then we'll go to.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking of how to word a similar question to that, and that basically the rate that we pay for the town that we negotiated for however long, and the rate that the customers that pay Eversource directly would go up and was higher before Community Power entered the market. So we're bringing the competition that brings the rate down for everybody, and also the other benefits like fighting the legislation for trying, the big corporations trying to have their costs covered by all residents. So, I was trying to think of how to ask that in a way to understand it, and I think through that process I kind of think that is the goal of it, and also is the goal ever to beat the price, or do you expect to ever beat the price of Eversource and Unitil, or is that you want to keep them low and offer these other benefits, and by having the market competition.
Yeah, I'd say the goal is absolutely to make the rates more competitive relative to other options, including utilities. And I think we will see a trending towards more competitive rates across the board as some of these things shake out, like utility under collections, if they put some of those back into their rates, then that'll be an important decision. If they don't have to put those losses back into the rates, it will be difficult or perhaps impossible to beat those rates, which is why that's such an important policy issue and why we're sort of active in that. And we'll appreciate support from communities who understand and care about that issue. But yes, I would expect that in the coming rate periods, we will see a trend towards parity, perhaps, on some of these rates, and a narrowing of the gap. And then, yes, ultimately the goal is to be equal to or more competitive than utilities.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes.
At one point we talked about this with just asking Councilor Valentina, and I forget what the rate was, but before Community Power entered the market, the rate was much higher, and obviously we can't attribute all of that decrease to Community Power, but what was the rate before? 17 or?
So it's 22 cents
22
when we first started. Eversource was way up here 22 cents. We came in like 11 cents or something like that, almost half. And because of competition from Community Power, all the utilities, Unitil, they all came down as well. My comments were simple that there are other benefits that Community Power brings to the table that you wouldn't get with just going out and purchasing electricity.
Other questions? Councilor?
This is more of a speculative thing, but when I think of community power of Newmarket, I'm thinking of a structure, an organization that generates, provides, anticipates needs, and tries to invest in power generation for the people of the town. Is that a realistic vision to entertain, and how far into the future should one expect that to be before it becomes or could become reality based on current conditions in the market, especially and also taking into account the fact that the large utilities own the distribution system and build it out.
That's a great question, and there'll be a lot of nuance in an answer, but we have one example of constructing a community scale solar project just in our first couple of years of existence. That's a group net metering project, so it has certain rules there.
Mm-hmm.
Those rules are different if you do a wholesale generator that's over 5 megawatts, 10, 20, 50 megawatts. We can do those kinds of projects. So there's kind of some different structures. We could do net metering, we could do a wholesale contract. We could do more of those now. We have done one of those, and we could do more of those soon. And then there is a more nuanced vision of what does a local energy market look like,
mm-hmm.
and the current policy framework does not enable that. When you have local solar or battery storage or electric vehicles or batteries in people's homes, all of those things can produce serious value. They can lower our isolating costs, energy, capacity, transmission costs. These costs are out of state, but they're not paid for that way. There's there's a disconnect between the regulations and that would enable that market. So we could imagine, say, there's 5,000 electric vehicles in the state, and that's just like a power plant that is gone unused. If you have those 5,000 electric vehicles, every day at 6 p.m., they could, discharge their power into the grid, or they could only charge at nighttime. And in doing so, they are saving everybody in New Hampshire money because they're bringing down our peak costs at 6 p.m. on a hot sunny day, and they're shifting that load into the evening or into the middle of the day when the sun is shining. We don't have a policy framework that sends a price signal to the 5,000 electric vehicles or 10,000 houses that could have batteries that could be a virtual power plant. To achieve that will require some of these policy reforms. We've started to make progress with Unitil on partnerships there. I think it's a 3 to 5 year time frame till we're really developing a better local market. That's the vision, and it takes state policy, it takes partnerships with utilities, it takes municipalities getting educated and working on these projects. So we're sort of in the coalition is build reserves to stabilize, make rates more competitive in the short term period of time, and that's the next couple of years. And then the pivot and the focus is what you're talking about. Is how do we really build this local energy market that is directly beneficial to residents and businesses, make us more energy independent. I mean, we are 60 to 70% natural gas, and that's all imported, and that's all subject to the whims of geopolitics. And so if we have local resources like batteries or renewables or some of these other resources, there's huge long-term benefit to having that control.
Council Ward.
I was going to ask if we have more people join, more towns join New Hampshire Community Power, lower the rate over time, or will that having more people increase the rate? Like if it keeps growing, will we see the prices continue to go down? Or see the prices go down?
Essentially, yes. There is an economy of scale, and things like the top two bars on this would be smaller because, well, at least the purple bar will be significantly smaller because we have the same operating expense in purple, but spread over more and more customers. So some of our fixed costs are the lower part of the rate, and then there's better purchasing power. So scale is good.
Councilor Lynch.
I was just wondering what kind of incentives utilities might need in order to move the market forward into a more resilient future.
Again, I'll use this. There's two instances. There's Unitil and Eversource. There's two of the utilities in this area. Unitil does not own transmission. Eversource does own its transmission. Transmission means interstate, federally regulated. And so that's a big part of Eversource's business. If you have 5,000 batteries and 5,000 homes that are shaving peak load, they are eroding transmission revenue for the utility. So there's a misaligned incentive there, and I think that's a difficult problem to solve. Unitil, they don't own transmission, they're more of a local distribution utility, and they're interested in smart meters. And you need essentially the infrastructure. You need data, you need data to be shared, you need to send the data to the customer that can respond, and now you have an automated fleet of batteries that just know price high, sell, price low, buy. There's just an arbitrage mechanism there. Again, that would be beneficial to the whole state. You need a willing partner in the state and utilities. Or you need state policymakers that are willing to, I think sort of push in that direction.
Are there states that are farther along and that New Hampshire is learning from, that you are learning from?
It's like a fascinating industry because, Texas has its market, and that's like a very on the far end of the free market spectrum. And we like a lot of things about that because the suppliers can serve net metered customers, and there's all these price signals for local resources. But then you see some of the consequences if there's an extreme weather event, that price really flows through to customers. So that's one example. And then there's other examples all over the country. There's this like mosaic of fully vertically integrated. The utility just controls the whole generation to meter, and there's no competition to different versions. There are other states for other countries. A place like the United Kingdom, you say something like time of use rate, and everybody's like, of course, like my washing machine and dryer, they just run in the evening hours. Like, why wouldn't you run your appliances when it's cheap and demand is low? Because you pay less. So it's a very accessible idea to some countries that have just done this already, and it's like old news. But in New Hampshire, if you don't have a time of use rate, people are like, well, I have to think about that to figure out how that works.
Thank you.
This way, just kind of wrap things up a little bit over here. So Newmarket Community Power is its own little entity type thing. And we could, in fact, go out and contract with some other company. There'd be some things that we would have to do to discharge ourselves from community power. But I would ask that the council continue to support community power. There are more benefits, I believe, staying with community power than abandon them just because they're 2 cents higher or 3 cents higher than customers.
All right. Anyone like the last word?
Kennedy, I do appreciate your address to the council. Appreciate it.
Of course, yeah, happy anytime. Good to connect with you all. And if there's any other information or questions we can answer, we'd be happy to do that. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to close this work session, and then the regular meeting will begin at 7.